Thanks, Molly. I'm Akiko Busch, and I'm interested in reading and writing design, and that's pretty much what I teach here. So I heard recently about a British experimental theater company that has produced all of Shakespeare's 36 plays using everyday objects to represent the characters. In tabletop Shakespeare, a spool of thread, a beer bottle, a pitcher, all become the players. Their drama narrated over the landscape of the kitchen table. Henry V is a candlestick. Macbeth, a jar of linseed oil. A messenger is represented by a water bottle, and a servant by a poem, by a spoon. In the YouTube clip that I watched, there was something incredibly mesmerizing about watching Claudius as a can of flea powder and Gertrude as a silver pot as they tried to reason with the salt and pepper shakers, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Yeah, it's riveting. I recommend you Google it and watch it. You see this little salt shaker going across the table, and it's Hamlet and to be, or yada yada. Anyway, I recommend it. I'm not sure quite what makes such a completely ridiculous device work. Maybe it's because we all know that small things can become large things and large things can become small things, or maybe we know that there's a thin line between the ordinary and the extraordinary, or maybe it's about the way things are arranged and rearranged in physical space can convey some kind of truth. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that language sometimes surpasses what we see in front of our own eyes, and that the right words will make us believe anything. Or perhaps it just has to do with the idea that it takes very, very little for us to give a voice to things and to invest character and meaning into inanimate objects. So this is the kind of thing we talk about in my class. MIT professor Sherry Turkle says we think with the things we love the things we think with. And what that makes me think is that it makes me think about the way people use physical objects to help them organize experience, which interests me, and it seems to me is essential to how we think about and practice design. So in class, we sometimes begin with news of the day, news of the world, which is to say news stories that are design stories, although they're not presented as such. I'm not one of those people who thinks that all the world's problems can be solved by design, but I am one of those people who's often amazed by how ordinary stories that don't think they're about design really, in fact, are about design. Some of the stories from last year that we talked about were how the size of wine glasses in England are growing. We talked about the use of origami-style cardboard tents that were offered to the homeless population in Brussels. We talked about a proposal to build a sports stadium at Fukushima in an effort to rebrand for the 2020 Olympics, in an effort to rebrand the site of the tsunami and earthquake. And also the graffitied wall outside the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which serves as a message board, apparently, for family members of the incarcerated. But our readings go on from there, out of fiction and nonfiction and poetry, and again, different texts that give us clues on how physical objects in space offer us ways to organize experience. We go to Georges Perec, the French writer, whose work addresses absence and loss and identity. As an archivist, he examines the basic principles we use to think about space and objects, and he goes from the blank page to furniture, to the room, to neighborhood, to uninhabitable spaces. We go to what Emily Dickinson means by home when she wrote, "Years I had been from home, and now before the door I dared not open it, lest a face I never saw before stare vacant into mine." We go to Pablo Neruda's Hymns to Ordinary Things, which include socks and books and tables and encyclopedias, and to Samuel Johnson, whose last line in his essay about his boarding house included the observation that a single house will show whatever is done or suffered in the world. Some of our outings have included a visit to the Donald Judd House in Soho, which left the class pretty strongly divided about whether the pristine installation represented the simple clarity of Judd's work or whether it reduced or actually erased the factory-like quality of messy production that typified Judd's energy and process. We also went to the Tenement Museum, in which curators comb flea markets and garage sales for objects to furnish the homes of immigrants. It could be a Zenith TV, a wire soap dish, a maroon sofa, a matching mirror and hairbrush that work to tell particular immigrant stories, whether it's an Irish family, a Chinese family with 4 kids, a Puerto Rican single mother, whatever. How do these objects tell their stories? The storytelling enterprise is described by one of the curators is composing a visual historical novel, and that interested me. Last year, we visited the Tiffany Everyday Collection, which generated conversation about the fetishizing of ordinary objects. We all have the compulsion to subvert the ordinary. It's part of common human experience. But what happens when this impulse is commodified by a luxury concern? In that collection, a sterling silver and vermeil rendition of a common ribbed tin can with a blue Tiffany enamel stripe, had a $1,000 price tag. The tin cans in your kitchen and mine are all inscribed with numbers indicating contents, place of origin, place of manufacture, destination, and so on. Unlike the silver can at Tiffany, each one of these tin cans has a real particularity to it. So who decides what makes for an everyday object? Who defines that? To answer that, we turn to Knausgaard's meditations on the meaning of the tin can in his domestic landscape, and believe me, he had a lot to say about it. And essays subsequently written by students included not only ideas about how we make decisions about food that's fresh and food that's preserved, but stories about childhood phones made with tin cans and string, cooking crayons in a tin can over an open fire, recycling, the sense of sufficiency conveyed by a shelf of canned goods, and elementary school charity drives that ask kids to donate canned food, thereby introducing them to ideas about social welfare. So in the year since I've been teaching this class, the virtual world has continued to completely transform our lives, all the while, I think, rethinking and reevaluating our interactions with the physical world. And I would suspect often making it richer and more complex. And it's not just the smart home and smart appliances and smart jewelry on the Internet of Things. Consider the podcast, which we will be considering in class this year. Everything is alive, in which inanimate objects are interviewed. Bars of soap, pillows, subway seats, mousetraps all reveal their inner lives and tell us what they think of us. And again, tabletop Shakespeare, in which a spool of thread, a beer bottle, or a candlestick become the agents in life's dramas. So these are some of the things that we'll be looking at in class this year. They're about storytelling, they're about material culture, and they're about the way we use things to structure and interpret experience, which to my mind is why they belong in a program about design research. Thank you.